For our first story, we have, am I the ass for telling my husband that he created this mess and he needs to fix it? My husband and I always planned on having kids. It ended up happening a couple of years before we planned due to a condom breaking. I didn't mind though, I was super happy to welcome our daughter, Belinda. A few years later, we started trying again for a second, but it took us a little bit to conceive and we ended up having to use IVF. The doctors never figured out why I couldn't get pregnant, the old-fashioned way, the second time, but after one round, my husband and I welcomed our son, Philip. Belinda is now 15 and Philip is 9. A close family friend of ours is going through their own infertility journey. My husband and I were discussing it. I mentioned something about IVF and Philip asked what that was. I explained and then added, we used that to have you. Belinda asked if we used IVF to have her. I was about to answer, no, and leave it at that, when my husband butted in with, no, you're here because the condom broke. Laughing. Belinda immediately looked hurt. We've had the talk and have discussed that sometimes condoms aren't effective, how to use them properly and other forms of birth control, so she understood exactly what he was saying. I quickly added, you were a surprise but a much welcome surprise. We always planned on having kids, it just happened a few years sooner than expected. Belinda just nodded and quietly said, okay, but I could tell she was really upset. I later told my husband to apologize and make sure she understands that she's loved and wanted. He told me I was overreacting. I spoke with Belinda and told her she was loved and wanted. She seemed to feel a little better, but still wasn't completely happy. It's been a few weeks and Belinda has made little jabs here and there. Not in a playful way, clearly she's still hurt. She'll say things to her dad like, well, clearly as I was some big mistake, and, sorry for inconveniencing you. My husband got fed up and told her she's being dramatic and he didn't mean anything by that comment. He later told me to tell her to cut it out. I said no. He said it made her feel like crap and hasn't spoken to her about it since. He has to deal with the consequences of that. She's a sensitive teenage girl, that's a scary combination when they feel rejected and unwanted by their fathers. My husband is now saying I'm in the wrong. Am I the ass? That's the end of our first post. Let's see what the commenters had to say. Our first commenter says, my mom was a whoops baby, and so was I. My son was also. If we were honest, I think a lot of people on this earth are whoops babies. One of the best things I've ever heard to be said to a child that wasn't planned came from my grandma to my mom. Grandma told mom, at first, I didn't know what I was going to do with you, but after you were here, I had no idea what I'd ever do without you. My mom was number 4. Maybe something along these lines from your husband may make her feel much better. But he will have to suck up his pride and not be the asshole and have that conversation with her. Good luck. Our second commenter says, not the asshole. He said it made her feel like crap and hasn't spoken to her about it since. He has to deal with the consequences of that. Why is this even a question? Our third commenter says, not the asshole, your daughter is still hurt. Your husband needs to put on his big boy pants and talk to her. It's silly of him to drag it out. You can obviously prove to your daughter she's loved. After all, you liked having a child like her so much you were willing to pay a small fortune to get one more. So to you, that unplanned pregnancy was like winning the lottery. My youngest brother was a broken condom result. It bothered him for years, until he had his first child, who also was unplanned. For our second story, we have, am I the asshole for telling a woman her child is welcome in my home, but she isn't, because of her criminal record? My husband, 28 male, and I, 27 female, have a 5-year-old son, who just started kindergarten this past fall. He has met a boy named Sam, who he has decided is his best friend. My son has had a lot of playdates in the past, because we tried hard to socialize him well from a young age. He has been asking if his friend Sam can come over for a playdate. Sure, no problem. I wrote a note with my name and number for Sam to give to his mom. I get a Facebook friend request from Sam's mom, who appears to be a methany. I work in healthcare, and recognize the sores on her face from picking. It's pretty obvious from her Facebook that she is on some kind of drugs, and maybe has mental health issues. Out of curiosity, I looked up her name in our county's jail view record, and yup, long history. Drug possession, fraud, prostitution, theft, battery, obstruction of justice. It's not great. Anyways, I didn't want to let who his mom is get in the way of our kids playing together. But there was no way in hell I'd let my son go over to their house for a playdate, despite her offering. I played it off as me being overprotective and him being my only child, to not offend her. She laughed, and said if you have more you'll learn to be less overprotective. She has 5 kids, but agreed to a playdate at my house. The park was also an option, but she said my house was fine. The weather is very cold here right now, so indoors over the park makes sense. Sunday comes over, I let the boy in. I mentioned she could come back in a few hours to pick him up. Whenever works for her, and I'd be sure to feed them both lunch. I asked if he has any food allergies, she says no. But she insisted on staying. I tried to make up a silly excuse, said I had a headache and would watch the boys diligently, but that I'm not really in the mood to hang out. She insisted that it would be great for us to get to know each other. Since the boys were out of earshot, already in the playroom, I stepped outside and quietly told her that I had looked up her criminal record, and I just don't feel comfortable having someone in my home with theft charges and an obvious drug problem. I said if that's a problem we could just meet at the park from then on, but the boys get along so I hope it's not a problem. I admit I was maybe a bit harsh and to the point. She kind of yelled at me and said I think that I'm better than her, which maybe I do, and that I don't know anything. She stormed off, her son still in the house. I checked with the kids to make sure they didn't hear anything. When she came back she just honked her horn, and refused to come to the door. My husband kind of thinks I'm an asshole. He's always been very gentle and kind. He thinks I should have just watched her like a hawk. I told him I don't want to forcefully subject myself to that kind of person, and I shouldn't have to be on guard about some crackhead stealing our stuff. Am I the asshole? That's the end of our second post. Let's see what the commenters had to say. Our first commenter says, probably would have been better to meet up at an indoor play area, mall or something similar. This way you don't have to worry her being in your house that you know you don't want her to be there. Our second commenter says, when we moved into a new area a neighbor said, your kids are welcome to come over but I have enough friends. I laughed. And one conversation with her was enough for me anyway. Our third commenter says, IDK something feels very rules for thee none for me about not letting her in. She doesn't know you from Adam but she is supposed to trust you with her kid? It just feels like a double standard I don't get. For our last story, we have, am I the ass for staying quiet after my coworker tried to get me fired only for my boss wife to find out and beat her up in the office? I, 33 female, have been in a private relationship with my coworker, Chris, 34 male, for about 3 years. We kept it quiet to avoid office gossip, but things took a turn when Jess, 28 female, joined our team. She became obsessed with figuring out my personal life, constantly prying and making comments like, you and Chris spend a lot of time together, and I wonder if there are any secret office couples. At first, it was just annoying, but then Jess escalated. She went to HR, falsely accusing me of using my relationship to get ahead. Chris and I had to sit through an investigation, but we were cleared. Still, the damage was done. People started treating me differently, and the office felt colder. I thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. A few weeks later, I noticed Jess getting close to our boss, Matt, 42 male. She started going on private, business lunches with him and suddenly had access to things she shouldn't. Then, out of nowhere, I was called into HR again. Another anonymous complaint claimed I was creating a hostile work environment. I knew Jess was behind it, but instead of panicking, I started documenting everything. When HR confronted me, I almost exposed Jess's relationship with Matt, but I decided to keep quiet. I figured she'd slip up on her own. And she did spectacularly. One night, our team went to a restaurant after work. Coincidentally, Matt's wife was there with her friends. As she was walking by, she overheard Jess loudly joking with a coworker about how Matt was wrapped around her finger, and how she was getting whatever she wanted at work. That got his wife's attention. I actually tried to warn Jess. The next morning, I pulled her aside and told her she needed to be more careful because Matt's wife had been right there when she made those comments. I wasn't even trying to be petty, I genuinely didn't want to see this turn into a full-blown disaster. But Jess just rolled her eyes, smirked, and said, please, she's too dumb to figure anything out. I shrugged and walked away. I tried. Well, Matt's wife wasn't dumb. She started digging, and a few days later, she stormed into our office furious. She went straight to Jess's desk, threw a stack of printed out texts onto her lap. Yes, she had receipts. And then she swung on her. Jess barely had time to react before Matt's wife grabbed her by the hair and dragged her to the ground. Papers went flying, people screamed, and it got ugly fast. Jess fought back, clawing at her, and within seconds, chairs were knocked over, a monitor crashed to the floor, and someone had to physically pull them apart. Security got involved, but by then, the damage was done. The cops were called because Matt's wife would not let up, screaming about how Jess was a homewrecker and that she deserved worse. HR immediately stepped in, and it was chaos. Employees were filming, people were panicking, and Matt looked like he wanted to disappear. In the end, Matt was fired for misconduct. Jess was escorted out for violating company policies, and his wife was taken out by security but wasn't arrested since Jess refused to press charges, probably to avoid more embarrassment. As for me, I kept my job, and the office finally had a real scandal to talk about. Now, some coworkers say I was being petty by not pushing harder to warn Jess, while others think she got exactly what she deserved. I never intended for things to explode like this, but after she tried to ruin my career, I don't exactly feel bad. Am I the ass for staying quiet after she refused to listen? That's the end of our last post. Let's see what the commenters had to say. Our first commenter says, "Bahahaha. Good story. If it's true, not the asshole. Enough warning to be heard, not enough to trigger a round of extra issues." Our second commenter says, "Bullshit." Our third commenter says, "Fake but somewhat enjoyable to read." That's all for today. If you enjoyed, please leave a like and subscribe. Thank you, and have a wonderful day.